Hello, good morning, everyone. Hopefully, you can hear me. I'm Dr. Salvator. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and provider with Telemedica. Sorry, I'm not better looking, but it's great to be here with everybody today. And I will be doing a quick intro and going over today's topic, which is the diagnoses of PTSD versus SSD. And I'll just be going over what those mean clinically and what are the symptoms and things that we as psychologists and evaluators and diagnosticians are looking for, as well as kind of explaining what that looks like in real life. And afterwards, we'll open up the floor for questions. There's a chat box below, and I will be looking for those. I apologize if I don't see everybody's or respond in a timely manner. But we have about an hour, so I'll be here and available the whole time. Please feel free to cut me off with questions anytime, even during this first part. So, PTSD versus SSD. What is that? What is that like? What does it look like from my end as a provider and medical professional? And what does it look like from your end as someone who may be living those symptoms or living with someone who is having those experiences? PTSD is a lengthier topic, so let's start with SSD. SSD stands for Somatic Symptom Disorder. And this is basically when someone has a medical or physical condition, sickness, illness, injury, what have you, and they usually tend to be pretty minor. And with somatic symptom disorder, there's a real cognitive preoccupation with those symptoms that it can look like a lot of different things. It could be obsessive thoughts and preoccupations with the disease itself or the injury. It can be really focusing and concentrating on the symptoms of that medical condition, whether that's pain or loss of functioning, like you're not able to do the things that you used to do because of this, or any other physical symptoms that kind of cross the line between medical and behavioral health. So things like losing sleep, having it affect your sex drive or your appetite, causing GI issues or headaches. And realistically, those symptoms for somatic symptom disorder, at least on the physical side, are pretty minimal. And with somatic symptom disorder, we are exaggerating them or obsessing over them or prolonging them in a way that's not really healthy. And really, the clinical cutoff for that we use for diagnosis is one, are these mental health symptoms, not the physical symptoms, but are the mental health symptoms getting in the way of you doing what you need to do in different areas of your life, at home, at work, at school, at church, in the community? And if the answer is yes, those obsessions or the preoccupations or changes in mood with those physical symptoms, if it's getting in the way of you doing what you need to do in one or more of those spheres, there's a diagnosis there. The other cutoff is if it's causing what we call a clinical level of distress, which means you can do all the things that you need to do in those different areas, but you're miserable. And there's a really low quality of life. And that's somatic symptom disorder. So again, there is a real physical injury or disease or illness or ongoing condition, but it tends to be pretty minimal in nature. Whereas, something else that we could diagnose, and we do pretty often, is mood disorder or depressive disorder or anxiety disorder due to a known physiological condition. And the big difference, one, SSD is kind of going out of style. The VA does not like to generally service connect that condition. And honestly, we don't see the true form of that very often, where there's a physical illness or injury and it's pretty minimal, but we are just having an extreme mental health reaction to it. So SSD is not very common. What is more common, and what I see in my practice here at Telemedica and in other places where I've worked in the past, is that mood disorder, depressive disorder, anxiety disorder due to known physiological condition. And commonly, that's, there is a service-connected medical condition or diagnosis, and it's pretty severe and it's very real, and you're not exaggerating those symptoms. So it could be a lot of chronic pain. It could affect your functioning in general because it's causing you to lose sleep because it's so painful, or things like tinnitus. That's really distracting. It can cause loss of hearing. It can be physically uncomfortable or even painful. So those things are, very real, and they're not exaggerated because they're happening. So basically, what we're talking about with mood disorder versus SSD, uh, there's a physical connection, but SSD is an exaggeration. Whereas those other disorders, due to known physiological condition, are very real. And with the long-term experience of chronic pain, or being in the military is hard. It's hard work. You have a hard job, and it's going to take a toll on the body, especially if you're in for any length of time. So depending on what you're doing, it could put a lot of strain on your joints, knees, hips, shoulders. The back is a huge one, and that over time will cause your physical body to deteriorate. You're not able to do as much, and that's naturally going to lead to anxiety, depression, again, the insomnia. Some people have panic attacks over, just the pain is too much, or am I going to be able to do what I need to do? Am I sacrificing time with my spouse or my children? Am I able to do the things that I used to like to do, such as exercise, or whatever your hobbies or interests may be? Sometimes these physical injuries prevent you from doing that. And because of the lack of sleep, or just because of the constant reminder of this injury that is uncomfortable or painful, that can cause a lot of irritability, a lot of anger, can get in the way of you concentrating, can get in the way of memory, being able to stay organized. And so with mood disorder, due to known physiological condition, basically the difference there is SSD, again, physical symptoms are minimal, and mental health is taking a huge front seat there. Whereas with mood disorder, the things that you're experiencing are pervasive. They reach into every area of your life, and they're pretty severe. And so naturally, with those kind of long-term chronic conditions, you're going to see some mental health effects. So I did see a question pop up. Does the VA understand SSD? They do, and because of that, that's why they don't want to service connect it, because they don't want to service connect an exaggeration of a physical injury, even if you are having very real mental health struggles. And to be honest, in clinical practice, there was a time where I was favoring that diagnosis at the beginning of last year, but doing more research about it, speaking to more people, growing in my knowledge of both the independent medical opinions and compensation and pension exams, the VA does not like it. Instead, that mood disorder or depression or anxiety due to a medical condition is much more common, and it's much more likely to be accepted by the VA, because there's a lot of psych research out there that corroborates, okay, well, if you have some kind of condition that causes pain or discomfort or stops you from doing what you need to do, naturally you're going to have some big mental health effects because of that. And it's just, realistically, what it is your body, your physical body, especially if you have chronic pain, is constantly sending your brain signals that you're under attack in some way. And over time, that's really exhausting, really exhausting. And the way I like to put it is, with mood disorder due to known physiological condition, your body doesn't feel good, so your mind is not going to feel good either. With SSD, your body kind of feels bad, but for whatever reason, that can really spin you out, freak you out. It's very upsetting, and it's something that we're very highly focused on. So let's talk for a little bit about PTSD. And I hope I explained SSD in a way that makes sense. And again, the mood disorder is something that I see a lot more often, and the VA is more likely to service connect. Just again, there's a lot of research out there, and for many veterans who are disabled or have physical service connections, that experience of mental health effects is very real. It's not an exaggeration at all, and so that's what we focus on. And since I've kind of changed my practice and educated myself more about that, I've had maybe uh, I think one or two people who really fit the diagnosis of SSD compared to the other. Okay, so now PTSD, and this is a huge topic, and I could go on for a long time about it. One, because probably I like to hear myself talk a little bit too much, but mostly because it's a very broad, expansive topic. So I'll try and do it justice in a way that is accessible and makes the most sense and is really the most helpful for all of you out there, especially because it looks like a lot of different things. And I know VA Claims Insider. I'm going to pause for a moment and hope that we're still live here. I apologize about that. So with PTSD, really what we're dealing with there is at least one, if not more, highly negative or traumatic stressful events that are experienced. Usually there's more than one, but it can just be one. And these events are experienced as very threatening, very scary, um, very distressing. And there's actually another subtype. So we had SSD and then the mood disorder due to known physiological condition. With PTSD, there's a cutoff between PTSD and something that often goes through the VA system, which is unspecified or other specified trauma and stressor related disorder. And really, the distinction here is the event is very different or the symptoms experienced are different. So with PTSD, criterion A, we call it, very first thing off the bat, there has to be an event, one or more, where you directly experience a threat or actual event that could cause death, serious injury, or sexual assault and harm. The other criteria is you witness someone experiencing that. You could learn of a very close friend or family member that is subjected to one of those things, and it's very sudden and unexpected. So that could be, you're serving somewhere on assignment. Maybe it's maybe it's a deployment, maybe it's a hardship duty station, maybe it's a remote assignment or a TDY, and you hear back home something happened to one of your good friends or immediate family members or extended family that you're close to. That could be part of the criteria. The last one, and this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, because the traditional view of PTSD is that you have to be in combat or something like that. And that's really not the case. And this last criteria for PTSD is the repeated exposure or experience of secondary trauma. And that looks like a lot of different things. It could be first responders. So that's your security forces, that's fire protection, that's pretty much anybody in the medical field, because you're exposed really, really frequently to other people who are in some form of distress or physical, emotional injury, a very high stress, very, very difficult to navigate. And most people in that moment, they do navigate it really well. And over time, they get better at navigating it. But it also is going to take a toll on you. And some of this stuff just sticks with you. And I know that there is a lot that goes on in the military, on bases, on deployments, on ships, wherever, that civilians just don't know about and probably wouldn't understand. And over time, again, the military has a hard job And not only is it going to leave a toll on your physical body, especially if you're in for any length of time, or it can leave that toll, emotionally, it can be very exhausting, very stressful, very traumatic as well. And some of that is by design. So your basic military training, specialized schools, and things like that, they are trying to simulate stress. They are trying to induce that artificial environment, so you can start to build up a tolerance for that. In some cases, it is experienced to some people as more traumatic than others. So, you airborne people, parachutists, you know, that training is very stressful, very difficult. You see a lot of physical injuries. Same thing with survival training, SEER. Uh, there is a lot that goes on there. A lot of specialized schools, you're going to see a lot of injuries, perhaps deaths, and it's really difficult. And again, some of these things just will stay with you, and that's normal and natural. PTSD is just your body and your brain having a normal and natural response to situations that are just so far outside the realm of normal human experience that we have difficulty processing them. And so the difference between PTSD and other specified trauma and stressor related disorder, or unspecified, is that the event or events that are experienced do not meet that criteria. So it's not life threatening, or the threat of serious injury, or doesn't involve sexual assault, but it's still experienced with that same high level of distress. It is traumatic to that individual. It just doesn't meet that criteria. Another time we may use it is if you do have one of those criterion A very serious stressor events, but you don't meet the rest of the criteria for PTSD. And what is that criteria? Well, there are different sections, and the easiest way, or the clinical way to explain that, is there's intrusive remembrance, there's physiological arousal, there's disrupted affect and cognition, and there's the avoidance of traumatic stimuli. Wow, fancy words, great. What does that mean? Well, let's start with intrusive remembrance. Again, some of the stuff that happens, especially if it's traumatic or distressing, whether it's to you, your buddy, you see someone else, civilian or otherwise, experience it, or you just have to go through these things over and over again. And that could be a lot of stuff. Submarine people, people who work in nuclear facilities where you have your PRP, your two-man rule, intelligence officers, drone pilots, chemical operations, NBC stuff, everything. When you have those experiences, the intrusive remembrance is not only is that stuff sticking with you, but you're thinking about it a lot. Could be that you have thoughts and memories just pop into your head during the day, even if you don't want them to, and they're hard to get out. It could be that you're having nightmares about it. And nightmares with PTSD look like a lot of different things. It could be you're experiencing that memory again. It could be you're experiencing parts of that memory. But maybe there's different people there, or it's a different setting, or pretty common is the ending of that memory is very different. And that can be very scary as well. But a lot more often we see what we call stress dreams. And that's where the content of the dream or the feelings and thoughts that it evokes are similar. So it could be recurring, could have a different theme that is similar to what you experience, whether it's a feeling of being trapped, or a feeling of being chased, or a feeling of impending doom or death. Those are pretty common, those stress streams. Some people experience a full-on flashback, and there's a spectrum and a continuum of that as well. For some people, the flashback is boom, they're totally back there in their mind, like it's happening again, and they see things, hear things, feel things, smell things that aren't really there, and they're totally removed from the current environment. In the extreme, there's dissociative episodes where you lose time, seconds, minutes, hours, where you kind of blank out and you're like, whoa, where am I? What's happening? And typically that's triggered by something in the environment that consciously or unconsciously reminds you of a particular event or a series of events. However, flashbacks can be a lot more common and mild than that. It could be that you are having an overlay of what you experience. So you're re-experiencing it, and you can see and hear what's going on around you in the real world, but also that stuff you experience is interposed, or almost like projected onto that. So you're kind of having two perceptual experiences at the same time, which can be really disorienting. Maybe you can still experience the real world around you, but in your head, that's all you're thinking about, so you're not really paying attention because you're just back there. Other times, and this is pretty common, there's emotional flashbacks, which is you're in this moment and you think that you're present, but whatever is happening around you, and it could be something you see or smell or hear, it could be the way that somebody's talking to you, whether that's your spouse or a coworker or a boss, and whatever it is, unconsciously or consciously, that invokes the same thoughts and feelings that you had during those original trauma events. So you're reacting now as if whatever happened in the past is happening right now, even though it's a very different situation. And this is where you see a lot of the people around you are like, "Whoa, why are you? I don't understand what you're doing. This makes no sense that you're doing this in this situation." But for you, experiencing and being so close to the situation, it can seem normal, or it can be hard to describe what you're going through. So that's intrusive remembrance. And a lot of times you also, when you're experiencing those things, or there's things around you that are reminding you of the event, um, you can have your thoughts go there, you can have your feelings go there, you can also have your body go there. Sometimes it triggers a full-on panic attack. More often you just kind of get your heart start racing, a little faster breathing, blood pressure rises, maybe you sweat a little bit. It doesn't get to that full range of panic attack, which is typically 10 to 20 minutes of difficult to breathe, heart is pounding, blood pressure is all over the place. You can have difficulty regulating your body temperature, too hot, too cold. It feels like you're going to have a heart attack or a stroke, or like you're going to die. That's a panic attack. Intrusive remembrance with PTSD doesn't always get there. It's just your body starts to. And that's the physiological arousal part. And now that we're segueing there, physiological arousal can look like a lot of different things. Commonly, we're not sleeping. So, and that could be insomnia, and that is defined as, you have a hard time going to sleep, you're waking up too often, or you wake up way too early. With traditional insomnia, you also have chronic daytime fatigue, or you want to sleep during the day, but you can't sleep at night. Other times we have hypersomnia, which is you are feeling a certain way and you just want to sleep through it. And sleep is actually a typical stress response. So you go through something very traumatic, and afterwards you just sleep for a long time, and that's kind of the body recharging. What we see a lot is you'll sleep for 3, 4 hours, maybe 5, and then you're up. And a lot of times that could be the after effect of training and conditioning, because you only need 4 hours to be battle ready, right? Well, science doesn't really actually know why we sleep just yet. That's still kind of a mystery, but we have a lot of theories. And some evidence we have is those first 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep, you're recharging the physical body. So you get that amount of sleep, and physically you're ready to go. But the last 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep is where you get more of those REM cycles, if you've heard of that. And that's where your mind starts to recharge, and that's really important for memory. So, and that's also when you have the most dreams. So a lot of people naturally with PTSD, they're going to wake up at that 3, 4, 5 hour mark, because we don't want to have the nightmares, and we may avoid sleep entirely because we don't want to have the nightmares. Other times it's just the training and conditioning kicking in, and other times it could be because it's not just that you don't want to have the nightmares, uh, but because you're so used to that pattern, and again, that's when we consolidate memory, you're going to have trouble remembering things, especially short term. And of course, when you're not sleeping, you're going to be irritable, And this is a very, what people would call a vicious cycle. Other effects of physiological arousal, and just sorry, looking at the time here. Wow, I am long-winded. Okay, so other physiological arousal, hypervigilance is a big one. That's just carrying that hyper-aware, hyper-alert, the high situational awareness that you are, again, trained and conditioned to have. It just never really goes away. And so you can't maybe remember a conversation you had with your spouse the week before, even though they have text messages to prove it happened. You can't remember what you had for breakfast, but you can walk into a situation and you can say, okay, I know where the exits are. I know where the doors are. I know where the windows are. I know how many people are here. I know what they're carrying. I know if it looks like they could have something concealed on them. I can tell by the way they walk or move that they maybe know how to handle themselves in a combat situation. And you're very attentive to that, to the detriment of everything else, which makes it hard to concentrate. It makes you feel anxious. It makes you on edge. Um, it can make it so that you're so sensitive to these things, you can even get jumpy, or what we call an exaggerated startle response. So you're always on the lookout, but then something unexpected happens, and that can induce the anxiety. It can induce the panic. It can induce the irritability and anger, because that is a secondary emotion. Other physiological arousal could be sensation seeking, where we are constantly chasing that adrenaline rush and that high, consciously or unconsciously, because in a traumatic situation, your body is very engaged. There's a lot of adrenaline. You're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so, consciously or unconsciously, we try and simulate that. We try and seek after it because we're already feeling that anyway. Our body and brain are locked into survival mode. So if we can make our surroundings and our environment match that internally, we feel normal. And that's why a lot of people want to go back on deployment, or they want to go back in, because there's that structure, there's a camaraderie, there's, you can invoke the same feelings. In the civilian world, it's hard to do that. You can't, you don't need that high level of survival instinct when you're walking through the grocery store. And if you feel that high level of arousal and you're walking through the grocery store, you're not going to be able to put a smile on your face or interface with the civilian world as well as you're expected to do, which is also difficult for other people to understand. And with this hyper arousal and stimulus seeking, that can lead us to do some pretty reckless or dangerous things. Some people take up skydiving. Some people will ride motorcycles. Some people will ride motorcycles or drive dangerously. They'll have road rage. Some people will drink more. They'll seek after drugs. Sometimes it's hypersexuality and really risky, dangerous sexuality. Could be compulsive spending, gambling, just really any unsafe habits. Even some things like compulsive eating. We're doing things that we know that we shouldn't. And so whether the environment mirrors that dangerous situation and we can get the same juices flowing, or whether we're just doing something we know we shouldn't do, and there's that very real sense of guilt or danger. Either way, we're trying to reconstruct that event. And honestly, that's just the body and the brain trying to, not only are we locked in survival mode, but we're constantly trying to process what happened to us. That's why the intrusive remembrance is there as well. And again, this is going to take a toll on your mind. So affect and cognition, what we call that's really just emotions. Affect is emotions. Cognition is thoughts. And that can look like a lot of different things. So having PTSD is exhausting. You're probably not sleeping. You're probably constantly on edge and aware of everything, and you're plagued by the intrusive remembrance. So a lot of people typically feel anxious. They feel sad. They feel worried, nervous, irritable, angry, numb, apathetic, like they just don't care about things. Um, you could have a hard time experiencing positive emotions, happiness, joy, excitement. Like all this stuff is going on around you, and you're like, oh, I should feel good about this. Like someone in my family is getting married, or I'm getting married, or having kids, or someone's graduating school. I'm graduating from school. I got this new job. And so you should cognitively, you should feel something positive, but you just don't. And that can be very distressing as well. That can make us feel like other people, not only do they not understand, but they're just different. Like they're a whole different species. They didn't have the same experiences as you, and they certainly act and think and operate differently than you now. And that can also decrease our interest in being around other people or doing things that we used to like to do, going out in the community, going to church, going to family events. And part of that is because we feel so different, we feel so bad. And part of that is because, well, I don't want to put myself in that situation where I could have panic attacks, or there's too many people, it's too loud, there's too much movement, it's too open, I can't protect myself, I can't protect my family, too stressful. And that kind of leads us to the last area. So we did intrusive remembrance, we did disrupted affect and cognition, we did physiological arousal, and the last big one, avoidance of traumatic stimuli. And that can look like a lot of different things as well. So it could be when you have those thoughts and memories come in your head, you just repress it. You're like, nope, nope, I'm not touching it, not going to think about it, not going to feel it. When your body starts getting those sensations again, you're like, no, I gotta get rid of this, can't do it. The other avoidance that is also pretty common is avoiding external reminders. So maybe you don't talk about your service, maybe you avoid certain movies or the news, or maybe you avoid people that could kind of arouse those or evoke those memories, because you want to avoid having a flashback or a panic attack. And maybe it's people who look a certain way, or just a whole like a whole gender of people. Maybe you avoid people wearing certain clothing. Maybe you avoid children, and that's hard if you have children of your own. Maybe you avoid driving. You don't want to be in a traffic jam. You don't want to go near any overpasses. Maybe you avoid water, or you avoid sand. You avoid things that you used to like to do. For some people, that's firearms and going shooting. They used to love it, but after their experiences, they don't want to do it anymore. It can look like a lot of different things. And so the difference between PTSD and that other specified or unspecified trauma and stressor related disorder is, again, with PTSD, you have that very real significant event of actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual assault that happens to you. You see it happen to someone else, it happens to someone close to you, or you're just repeatedly exposed to very dysphoric or negative secondary trauma. So a lot of things happening to other people around you, and you have to deal with it, whether that's as a first responder or something else. With other specified and unspecified, your trauma event or events don't rise to that level, or perhaps you do have that criterion A, crazy, stressful, negative, traumatic event, but you don't meet the full criteria for other PTSD. So you don't have all the intrusive remembrance, you don't have all the physiological arousal, you don't have all the disrupted affect and cognition, or maybe you don't avoid those external or internal reminders. And that's basically PTSD versus SSD. So SSD, again, it stems from something physical that you're experiencing, and there's mental health effects from that. Whereas PTSD is there's an event that happens to you, your body and brain get locked in survival mode, and you go from there and you operate as if the event is constantly happening or going to happen, which is exhausting and has far-reaching effects, especially because the whole time your body and brain are still, even though you're avoiding it, they're still trying to process it, whether that's through injecting those thoughts and memories or feelings or nightmares, all of that stuff. So again, SSD and the mood disorder, it starts with a physical injury or condition, and then we have mental health, whereas PTSD, there is a stressful or traumatic event, and that affects our mental health going forward. And I know that was pretty long. I hope that explained things a little well. I'll go ahead and go into the chat, because it looks like there's quite a few that I miss, and I apologize. So let me just run through these real quick. And again, sorry I wasn't monitoring that, but just keep typing and I'll look through these. From Eric, will having a rating for PTSD or SSD affect a veteran's ability to own firearms? Typically, I would say no. Again, it depends on state and federal laws, but no. And a lot of this stuff, it's protected health information, so we can't report it to any other agencies. The only time that we would do that is if you communicate uh, plans, what we call plans, means, and intent to harm yourself or others. So if you're having active suicidal ideation where you do want to harm yourself, that we would have to report, and yeah, that can affect your ability to access or own firearms. But there's a lot of people who have what we call passive suicidal ideation, which is, I'm pretty miserable. There's a lot of pain, physical or emotional, and I don't want to deal with that anymore. Maybe my family would be better off without me. Maybe it would just be better if I wasn't here anymore. That's the more passive suicidal ideation. And I would say, most people, civilian or otherwise, they're going to experience that from time to time during their life. That's normal. That's not going to affect your ability to have firearms. I mean, most people experience that. The other thing, homicidal ideation. So if you're in an evaluation with me and you're like, no, I'm definitely going to do this to my boss or my neighbor or whatever. Yeah, I need to report that legally and ethically. I'm obligated to do so. But if you're having the road rage and there's no plans, mean, or intent, you're just like, I'm on edge all the time and I'm irritable and I'm angry and I can't control it. And afterwards I feel bad or I don't understand why that happened, but I'm not going to do anything like that. No, that's not going to affect your ability to own firearms. And a lot of times just having the diagnosis will not affect necessarily different lines of work, whether that's law enforcement, other first responders. Uh, it could be driving. It could be maybe you're a government contractor. A lot of times this will not affect clearance. Aviation can get a little tricky, but as long as you can show, sure, I have the diagnosis, but it's being controlled and treated in a positive way, whether that's through therapy or certain medications, because some medications will ground you, but there are other ones that you can take. For the SSD and the mood disorder due to known physiological condition, Cymbalta or duloxetine can be a good one because it's primarily used for chronic pain, so it's a medical prescription typically, but it also targets the depression and anxiety that are affected. Gabapentin is also common. That's for the nerve pain. But as long as you can show that you're not a threat to yourself or anyone else, and yeah, maybe you have the diagnosis and the symptoms, but you're not you're not at they're not controlling you. You're managing them correctly and appropriately. No, should not affect work. Should not affect your personal life as far as firearms. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna give it another minute or so. There's comments about me being great in the chat. I think those have been greatly exaggerated. Let me see. Okay, we'll give it another minute or two for questions. But thank you everybody for being here. It was my pleasure to be here and to serve all of you. Really grateful and appreciative for this opportunity. I'll just wait just another minute or so. Thank you, Mr. Green. Okay, well, if we don't have anything else, thank you everyone for joining me again. Hopefully we can do more of these events, and we really value your feedback, not just here in the chat and during these Facebook Live events, but we also really need, it's not that we're grateful for it or appreciate it. We need feedback from all of you as far as what you're looking for, what you're going through so that we can continue to develop and be better able to help all of you. So thanks everyone again for being here. And if you have other questions or things that I didn't address, please let us know in whatever way you can. And we're going to be here for you, and we're going to do our best to take care of things. Oh, one other question. Only about PTSD, it can also apply to depression and anxiety. So depression and anxiety are symptoms of PTSD. So anxiety, depression, anger, panic attacks, cognitive symptoms, that can all be PTSD. Depression and anxiety can also happen independently. There's typically a genetic loading for that. So if you have people in your family who are more prone to depression and anxiety, it doesn't take as much to set off that experience for you. But the depression and anxiety with a physiological condition is also different. So PTSD includes depression and anxiety. The SSD or mood disorder is you are feeling depression and anxiety. So sad, numb, anxious, worried, nervous because of those physical events. With generic, or I shouldn't say generic, with independent depression and anxiety, there is typically not necessarily a trigger. So with depression, it tends to be episodic, where you have a few days, weeks, months where you just feel down, and maybe something happened to induce that, maybe not. And then you come out of it, and there's a few days, weeks, or months where you're kind of back to baseline, a little normal, and then you go back down. Anxiety is typically more consistent, and you're not always going to have the panic attacks. It's more the feelings of nervousness, worry, can be general or very specific. There could be fear associated with it. A lot of times there's difficulty in sleep, difficulty in concentrating. There's irritability, but not necessarily anger. There's a lot of somatic symptoms, like especially in kids, headaches, stomach aches. There could be refusal of some kind. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to go to school. We also see a lot of muscle tension and rigidity. So just soreness because we're constantly on edge. And that's anxiety. So those things are usually, I would say, almost always experienced with PTSD and almost always experienced with SSD or the mood disorder due to known physiological condition. But they can also occur independently, and those are things that you can get service connected for as well. I mean, if you are in those remote duty stations, or some of them that tend, I know people have good experiences and bad experiences in different places, but some, to my understanding, that can be more difficult are duty stations in Korea, Okinawa, in the Middle East, such as Bahrain or the UAE. Those places, if you're there for a long time, that can lead to the experience of depression or anxiety. I've also come across people who have a lot of anxiety because they got called up or mobilized frequently, but then they never actually were deployed. It's like, oh no, you're going. No, we're just going to turn this into training, or you can go back. Oh no, you're going, and then, and so that can be, that constant up and down can cause anxiety. Any other questions? I hope I hit that right. I will say, looking at the question again, depression is typically a slowing down of thought and emotion and your physical rhythms, whereas anxiety is an escalation of those. I'd also say in men in particular, anxiety and depression are both typically experienced or expressed as anger. Um, so that's a big one. If people are saying, you're just so angry all the time, why are you angry? Chances are you're probably actually anxious or depressed. It's just a secondary emotion because it is easier to express. It makes us feel powerful, and culturally, especially a lot of cases with the military, it's an acceptable emotion to have compared to anxiety or depression. Any other questions? Okay. Well then, thanks again for everyone joining for me. Yes, this will be shareable afterward, so you can come. That's correct, Mr. Green. Uh, if you just want to come back and hear my wonderful voice and see my beautiful face, you're welcome to. Or if you have friends and family that you think this would be really good for, definitely you can come back to it. This will be on different platforms, I believe. And if you're having any issue being able to see this or have access to it, please reach out to us again. But thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate all of you. And I'm also really grateful to our tech and administrative teams for making all this possible, because I could not figure it out on my own. And thanks to all of you for being here with me. And, just even watching this, it takes a special kind of bravery to just begin that journey, be open and vulnerable. And it can kind of suck. It doesn't feel great, but whatever is happening now, probably it can be a hell of a lot better than it is. So, thanks everybody, and looking forward to doing this again and seeing all of you later. Thanks.